Every morning, millions of people wake up, open a plastic bottle, and swallow a pill. Whether it's amoxicillin for an infection or a standard beta blocker for blood pressure, we assume that little capsule will always be there. But in 2026, when conflict ignited between the US and Iran, that assumption burned up with the cargo ships. That daily pill suddenly became the center of a global crisis. The definition of a weapon has shifted. The greatest threat to national security is no longer a kinetic explosive. The most effective way to cripple a country is to paralyze its pharmaceutical supply chain. During World War II, the US government classified basic medicines alongside steel and oil. They were vital war materials. Surviving a protracted conflict of attrition required the sheer industrial capacity to mass-produce treatments for the front lines. If a nation couldn't heal its soldiers, it couldn't keep fighting. That brutal logic of medical survival has returned in 2026. Only now, the battlefield has moved from muddy trenches to commercial shipping lanes. To understand the vulnerability, you have to look inside the medicine itself. Every drug relies on an API, or Active Pharmaceutical Ingredient. This is the essential chemical core that actually makes a medication function inside your body. Over 80% of the world's basic APIs come from China and India. To reach Western pharmacies, these essential chemicals must travel mandatory shipping routes, funneling through unavoidable geographic choke points, specifically the Strait of Malacca and the Persian Gulf. When the US-Iran war broke out directly inside these exact choke points, those shipping lanes froze. The financial fallout was immediate. Cargo insurance premiums spiked by 400%, paralyzing non-emergency pharmaceutical shipping. By destroying the fragile, just-in-time supply chain, geography accidentally turned a localized Middle Eastern conflict into an inescapable Western healthcare crisis. While America drained its military resources securing the Persian Gulf, China spent its energy quietly and rapidly expanding its biological manufacturing capacity. This chart shows the exact scale of that dominance. China controls 36% of all global APIs and over 70% of the raw materials required for antibiotics. This concentration creates the strategic threat of weaponized APIs. A Chinese export restriction on medicine would hit harder than past controls on rare earth minerals. The barrier to Western independence is severe. It takes 5 to 7 years to rebuild a domestic antibiotic supply chain from scratch. China has achieved a bloodless siege. They hold the ultimate leverage to restrict Western healthcare without firing a single missile. The medical industry calls this the inventory cliff. It is the exact horizon line where national and hospital drug reserves run completely dry because of blockades. When you hit that cliff, the economic reality is harsh. Skyrocketing energy costs and scarce supplies force medicine to transition from a basic human right into a luxury commodity. This pyramid illustrates the pharmaceutical tier system. Premium drugs are prioritized exclusively for the military, strategic allies, and wealthy individuals. Down at the broad base, the general public fights for scraps, forced to rely on degraded supplies or face completely empty pharmacy shelves. Macroeconomic forces and war have literally repriced the value of a human lifespan. Survival now depends entirely on an individual's geopolitical importance or wealth. In the 20th century, international human rights and rules of war were defined in rooms like this, but those concepts struggle to survive today. Global power and international order are no longer determined by treaties. They are dictated strictly by pharmaceutical manufacturing capacity and control over maritime transit choke points. In the 21st century, a patient's health and lifespan are no longer medical guarantees. They are vulnerable variables traded on a geopolitical chessboard.